The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the third time. 23 years of service to the crown had taught him that perfection in appearance meant respect for the institution he served. The red tunic, pristine white gloves, and polished boots reflected his dedication to duty. Today marked another routine public event at Buckingham Palace, where tourists would gather behind the iron gates to catch glimpses of the famous guards in their distinctive uniforms. Marcus had seen it all during his career. Tourists attempting to make the guards laugh or move, children waving enthusiastically from behind the barriers, and the occasional protester who needed gentle but firm redirection. The Queen's Guard maintained their stoic composure through every situation, trained to remain motionless and silent unless circumstances demanded otherwise. Protocol was everything in this role, drilled into them until it became second nature. The crowd began forming early that Tuesday morning, families with cameras ready to capture the iconic British tradition. Among them stood the Harrison family, visiting from Manchester for their daughter Emma's 8th birthday. Emma had always been fascinated by the royal family and begged her parents for months to visit the palace. Her bright blue dress matched her excited eyes as she pressed against the railings, hoping to see a real princess. Emma's parents, Sarah and David, were typical middle-class professionals trying to give their daughter a memorable birthday experience. Sarah worked as a nurse at Manchester General Hospital, while David managed a small accounting firm. They had saved for months to afford this London trip, booking a modest hotel and planning every detail to make Emma's birthday special. Neither parent noticed the subtle changes in their daughter's behavior over recent weeks, dismissing her quietness as typical childhood phases. Behind Emma's bright smile and excited chatter about princesses lay a terrible secret that had been eating away at her for months. Her uncle Richard, Sarah's brother, had been staying with them while searching for work after his divorce. What started as innocent games had gradually become something that made Emma feel confused and frightened. Richard had told her it was their special secret, that telling anyone would hurt the family and make everyone very sad. The 8-year-old struggled to understand why something that felt wrong was supposed to be kept secret. She had tried to tell her mother once, but the words wouldn't come out properly, and Sarah had been busy with work stress. Emma began having nightmares, her appetite decreased, and she started avoiding being alone with Richard. Her parents attributed these changes to adjustment difficulties with having another adult in their small house. As the family stood waiting behind the palace gates, Emma clutched a small piece of paper in her pocket. She had written a simple message the night before, practicing the words carefully. The idea had come to her after seeing a movie where someone passed a secret note. Maybe, she thought, someone important at the palace could help her. The guards looked so strong and official, surely they would know what to do. Marcus took his position at the palace entrance, his practiced eye scanning the crowd for any potential security concerns. Years of experience had taught him to notice subtle details that others might miss. The excited families, the clicking cameras, and the general atmosphere of wonder were all familiar elements of his daily routine. He spotted the little girl in the blue dress immediately, noting her intense focus on the guards rather than the typical tourist excitement of trying to make them move. Emma watched Marcus intently, studying his face and wondering if he might be different from the other adults who hadn't listened to her hints and concerns. There was something about his kind eyes that made her feel he might understand. She had heard her teachers say that police officers and soldiers were there to help people in trouble, and surely palace guards were similar. The crowd grew larger as the morning progressed, with tour groups arriving and families jockeying for better viewing positions. Emma's parents were busy taking photographs and reading from their guidebook about the history of the guard ceremony. They were so focused on creating perfect holiday memories that they didn't notice their daughter's growing anxiety and determination. Richard had called that morning, asking when they would return to Manchester. He had even suggested extending their stay, offering to contribute money for extra nights at the hotel. Sarah thought it was generous of her brother, not realizing that Emma had overheard the conversation and felt panic rising in her chest. The thought of going home to Richard waiting for them made her stomach hurt with fear. As Marcus continued his stoic watch, he began to notice the little girl's persistent attention. unlike other children who would eventually get bored and wander off. She remained fixed in position, staring directly at him with an intensity that seemed unusual for someone her age. Her parents appeared loving and attentive, taking photos and pointing out details about the palace, which made her focused behavior even more intriguing. Emma's small hand tightened around the crumpled paper in her pocket. She had been practicing, in her mind, how to get the guards' attention without her parents noticing. The words on the paper were simple but desperate. "Help me. My uncle hurts me. Please help." She had drawn a sad face at the bottom, the only way her 8-year-old mind could express the complexity of her situation. The morning wore on with typical tourist activities, but Marcus found himself increasingly aware of the little girl in blue. Something about her demeanor suggested she was working up courage for something significant. His training had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was telling him to pay attention to this particular child. The way she kept glancing, at her parents then back at him, suggested internal conflict about something important. As the clock approached noon, Emma knew she had to act soon. Her parents had mentioned leaving after lunch to visit another attraction. This might be her only chance to reach someone who could help her escape the nightmare that waited at home. She took a deep breath, checked that her parents were distracted by their camera, and began to slowly move closer to the palace railings where Marcus stood guard. Emma's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone around her could hear it. She glanced back at her parents, who were now engaged in conversation with another family about the best photography angles. This was her moment. With trembling fingers, she pulled the crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and smoothed it out as best she could. The words she had written in purple crayon seemed to blur through her nervous tears. Marcus maintained his rigid posture, but his peripheral vision caught the subtle movement of the girl approaching the railings. His years of training had taught him to observe without appearing to look directly at potential situations. What he saw made his professional instincts sharpen with concern. The child's body language spoke of fear and desperation, rather than typical tourist curiosity. Her shoulders were hunched, her movements careful and secretive, and she kept checking over her shoulder like someone afraid of being caught. The little girl reached the iron railings and stood directly in front of Marcus, barely reaching his waist in height even with the elevation difference. She looked up at his face with pleading eyes that seemed far too serious for an 8-year-old on her birthday trip. Marcus could see tears forming, though she was clearly trying hard not to cry. His heart began to race, though his exterior remained perfectly still according to protocol. Emma held up the paper, pressing it against the railings where Marcus could see it clearly. Her small hands shook as she unfolded it completely, revealing her desperate message written in a child's careful handwriting. The purple crayon words stood out starkly against the white paper. "Help me. My uncle hurts me. Please help." Below the text, she had drawn a simple but heartbreaking sad face, the mouth turned down in an expression of genuine anguish. Marcus read the message in a single glance, and for the first time in his 23-year career, he felt his professional composure crack. His face, trained to remain expressionless in all circumstances, visibly paled as the implications of the child's silent plea hit him like a physical blow. The protocol that had governed his every action seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the desperate child standing before him seeking help. The guard's reaction was immediate and instinctive. Without thinking about regulations or proper procedures, Marcus broke his rigid stance and took a small step toward the railings. His movement was subtle but significant, a clear acknowledgement that he had received and understood the girl's message. Emma saw the change in his posture and felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. Someone had finally seen her cry for help. Marcus glanced quickly around the courtyard, assessing his options while fighting to maintain some semblance of his professional demeanor. Other guards were stationed at various points. Tourists continued their normal activities, and palace security personnel moved through the crowd in their usual patterns. He needed to act quickly but carefully, knowing that any wrong move could result in the child being taken away before proper help could arrive. Emma watched the guard's face intently, searching for any sign that he understood the gravity of her situation. When she saw him nod almost imperceptibly, she felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. relief that someone finally knew her secret, and terror about what would happen next. Her uncle had repeatedly warned her about the terrible consequences of telling anyone about their special games. The guard carefully looked toward Emma's parents, who remained distracted by their tourist activities. He could see they were loving and attentive in their interactions with their daughter, which made the situation even more complex. This wasn't a case of obvious neglect or abuse from the parents themselves, but something more complicated that would require delicate handling. Marcus knew he had to act within the next few minutes. Once the family moved on to their next destination, the opportunity to help this child might be lost forever. He had seen enough cases during his military career to understand the urgency of the situation. Children who found the courage to ask for help rarely did so multiple times if their first attempt failed. Using subtle hand signals that he hoped the child would understand, Marcus indicated that she should stay where she was. Emma nodded slightly, understanding that the guard was going to try to help her. She quickly folded the paper and slipped it back into her pocket, just as her mother called her name from behind. "Emma, darling, come back here for a photo with Daddy and the palace in the background," Sarah called cheerfully, completely unaware of the life-changing communication that had just taken place between her daughter and the guard. Emma's stomach dropped as she realized she would have to leave her position by the railings. Marcus watched as the little girl reluctantly returned to her parents, her shoulders sagging with disappointment and fear. He could see her looking back at him desperately, worried that her one chance for help was slipping away. The guard made a subtle gesture, pointing toward a specific area of the courtyard where palace security typically stationed themselves during public events. The child's father, David, lifted her up for the photograph, commenting on how lucky they were to have such perfect weather for their London adventure. Emma managed a weak smile for the camera, but her eyes remained fixed on Marcus over her father's shoulder. The guard maintained eye contact, trying to convey through his expression that help was coming and she should not give up hope. Marcus knew he needed to break protocol completely now. The child's safety was more important than any regulation or procedure. He began to subtly signal to his colleague stationed near the main entrance, using a series of hand gestures that indicated a serious situation requiring immediate attention. The other guard, Corporal James Wright, noticed the unusual behavior and began moving in their direction. Emma's family finished taking their photographs and began walking toward the palace gift shop, planning to buy souvenirs before leaving for their next tourist destination. Emma dragged her feet, trying to delay their departure while keeping her eyes on Marcus. She could see him making gestures to another guard, and her heart began to race with both hope and fear. As the Harrison family moved further away from the railings, Marcus made his decision. He abandoned his post entirely, something that would normally result in serious disciplinary action, and began walking quickly toward Corporal Wright. The two guards met near the center of the courtyard, where Marcus quickly explained the situation. In urgent, hushed tones, "We have a child in immediate danger," Marcus whispered, his voice tight with controlled emotion. 8-year-old girl, blue dress with the family heading toward the gift shop. She passed me a note saying her uncle is hurting her. We need to contact Child Protection Services and police immediately, but we have to be careful not to spook the parents or lose track of the family. Corporal Wright's expression grew serious as he processed the information. Both men understood the gravity of the situation and the need for immediate but careful action. They had perhaps minutes before. The family left the palace grounds entirely, potentially taking the child back to a dangerous situation. Corporal Wright immediately activated his radio, speaking in coded language that wouldn't alarm nearby tourists, but would summon the appropriate authorities. "Control, this is Wright. We need a Level 3 child welfare response at the main courtyard. Immediately repeat, Level 3 response required." The code was one they hoped never to use, reserved for situations involving immediate danger to minors. Within moments, plainclothes security personnel began converging on the area, blending seamlessly with the tourist crowd. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen from the Metropolitan Police's Child Protection Unit happened to be conducting a security review at the palace that day and received the alert within minutes. Her experience with sensitive cases involving children made her the perfect person to handle this delicate situation. Emma walked between her parents toward the gift shop, her small hand pressed against her pocket where the note remained hidden. Every few steps she glanced back toward where Marcus had been standing, desperately hoping he had understood her plea for help. Her parents chatted excitedly about their morning at the palace, completely unaware of the drama unfolding around them. "I think Emma's getting tired," Sarah Harrison commented to her husband, noticing their daughter's subdued behavior. "Maybe we should grab a quick lunch after the gift shop and then head back to the hotel for a rest before the London Eye this afternoon." Emma's heart sank at the mention of returning to the hotel, knowing it meant getting closer to the end of their trip and returning home to Uncle Richard. Detective Inspector Chen approached the scene carefully, studying the family dynamics from a distance before making contact. Her trained eye took in the loving interaction between the parents and child, noting no obvious signs of abuse from the immediate family members. This suggested the threat came from someone else in the child's life, making the situation more complex but potentially easier to address if handled properly. Marcus remained at his modified position, tracking the family's movements while staying close enough to provide assistance if needed. Breaking protocol felt foreign to him after decades of rigid discipline, but seeing the terror in that little girl's eyes had changed something fundamental in his perspective. Some things were more important than following rules, especially when a child's safety was at stake. The gift shop buzzed with typical tourist activity, families browsing through royal memorabilia and souvenirs. Emma wandered listlessly among the displays while her parents selected postcards and a small Union Jack flag for her collection. She kept looking toward the windows, hoping to catch sight of the guard who had acknowledged her desperate message. Detective Chen positioned herself near the gift shop entrance, observing the family's behavior patterns. The child appeared withdrawn and anxious, frequently checking her surroundings in a manner that suggested hypervigilance common in trauma victims. The parents showed no signs of awareness regarding their daughter's distress, indicating they were likely unaware of whatever was happening to her. "Sweetheart, would you like this little teddy bear with the crown?" David Harrison asked Emma, holding up a small stuffed animal. Emma nodded absently, her mind focused entirely on whether the guard had believed her message and if anyone was actually going to help her. The normalcy of gift shopping felt surreal given the magnitude of what she had just attempted. Marcus maintained visual contact with the family through the gift shop windows, ready to signal if they showed signs of leaving the palace grounds. His radio crackled quietly with updates from the coordinated response team now assembled around the courtyard. Palace security, Metropolitan Police, and Child Services personnel were all taking positions, waiting for Detective Chen's signal to approach the family. The detective knew she had one chance to handle this situation correctly. Approaching too aggressively could traumatize the child further or cause the family to leave before proper investigation could occur. Too subtle an approach might miss the opportunity to help a child in immediate danger. She decided on a gentle but direct strategy that would allow her to speak with the family while appearing to be a routine security check. Emma's father was paying for their souvenirs when Detective Chen approached with her identification clearly, visible but discreetly presented. "Excuse me, sir, I'm Detective Inspector Chen with the Metropolitan Police. We're conducting routine security checks today with families visiting the palace. Might I have a word with you and your wife for just a moment?" Sarah and David Harrison exchanged glances, immediately concerned, but trying to understand what could possibly require police attention. "Of course, officer, though I can't imagine what this might be about," David replied, instinctively moving slightly closer to Emma. Their daughter's reaction was markedly different, her eyes widening with a mixture of hope and terror as she realized something was finally happening. "It's purely routine, nothing to worry about," Detective Chen assured them, though her trained gaze was primarily focused on Emma's reactions. "We sometimes follow up on various reports or concerns that come to our attention during public events. Could you tell me who's traveling with you on this London trip?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Emma felt her heart begin racing. Someone had listened to her message, and now they were asking about Uncle Richard without directly mentioning him. She looked up at the detective with wide eyes, trying to communicate silently that this was about the person waiting for them back, home in Manchester. "Well, it's just our family of 3, Sarah answered, gesturing to Emma and David. "Though my brother has been staying with us recently while he looks for work. Richard's going through a difficult divorce and needed somewhere temporary to stay. He's watching our house while we're in London, actually." Detective Chen noticed Emma's immediate physical reaction to the mention of her uncle's name. The child's face paled, her breathing became shallow, and she unconsciously took a small step backward. These were classic signs of a trauma response to a specific trigger, strongly supporting the legitimacy of whatever message the guards had received. "I see," the detective replied calmly, making a note while keeping her tone conversational. "And Emma, are you enjoying your birthday trip to London?" She directed the question specifically to the child, hoping to gauge her ability to communicate and assess her emotional state more directly. Emma nodded but remained silent, her eyes darting between the detective and her parents. The little girl was clearly struggling with whether it was safe to speak, torn between her desperate need for help and her learned fear of breaking the secret her uncle had imposed upon her. The detective recognized this internal conflict and knew she needed to create a safe space for the child to communicate. "You know, Emma, sometimes children who visit the palace want to tell us special things about their trips or even about problems they might have at home," Detective Chen said, gently crouching down to the child's eye level. "Is there anything you'd like to share with me about your visit today or about anything else that might be worrying you?" The question hung in the air as Emma's parents looked on with growing confusion and concern, beginning to realize this was not a routine security check. The little girl looked up at her parents, then back at the detective, her small hand reaching unconsciously toward her pocket, where the note remained hidden. Emma's small hand trembled as she slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled piece of paper. The purple crayon words that had seemed so bold when she wrote them now felt inadequate to express the magnitude of her fear. She looked at her parents, who were watching with growing alarm and confusion, then back at Detective Chen, who waited patiently with kind but serious eyes. "I wrote something," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the gift shop. "For the guard. I showed it to the soldier man because I didn't know who else would listen to me." Her parents exchanged worried glances, beginning to understand that something significant was happening that they had been unaware of. Detective Chen gently took the paper from Emma's shaking hand and read the message that had prompted this entire response, the simple words, "Help me, my uncle hurts me. Please help." Along with the sad face drawing told a story that required immediate and careful attention. She folded the paper respectfully and looked at the confused parents with professional compassion. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, I need to speak with you and Emma separately for a few minutes," the detective said calmly. "There's a family room here at the palace where we can talk privately. What Emma has shared with us today requires some follow-up questions, and I want to make sure everyone feels safe and comfortable." Sarah Harrison felt her world shifting as she began to comprehend what might be happening. "Emma, sweetheart, what does this mean? Has someone hurt you?" Her maternal instincts were screaming that she had somehow missed something crucial about her daughter's well-being, and the guilt was already beginning to overwhelm her. David Harrison's face had gone pale as he processed the implications. His mind raced through recent months, thinking about his brother-in-law Richard's presence in their home and any signs he might have missed. "Emma, honey, you can tell us anything. We love you and want to keep you safe," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma looked at her parents with tears streaming down her face, finally able to release the terrible burden she had been carrying alone for months. "Uncle Richard said it was our special secret and that telling would make everyone sad and break up our family. He said I would get in trouble and you wouldn't love me anymore if anyone found out about our games." The words hit Sarah and David like physical blows. Sarah sank into a nearby chair, her hands covering her mouth in horror as she realized her brother had been abusing her daughter under their own roof. David's hands clenched into fists as anger and protective fury warred with guilt over his failure to recognize the signs. Detective Chen guided the family toward a private room that palace security had prepared for sensitive situations. The space was comfortable and non-threatening, designed to help families feel at ease during difficult conversations. She had handled hundreds of these cases, but the combination of the child's courage in seeking help and the parents' obvious devastation never became easier. "Emma, you were very brave to ask for help today," the detective said once they were settled in the private room. "Nothing that happened to you was your fault, and telling the truth about it was the right thing to do. Your parents love you very much, and they're going to make sure you're safe from now on." Sarah was sobbing quietly, reaching out to hold Emma's hand while struggling to process her own feelings of failure as a mother. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I should have noticed something was wrong. I should have protected you better. Why didn't you feel like you could tell me?" Emma leaned into her mother's embrace, finally feeling safe enough to share the details of her months-long ordeal. "I tried to tell you once, Mummy, but the words felt too scary and big. Uncle Richard said that if I told anyone, the police would take me away from you and Daddy, and everyone would think I was a bad girl." Detective Chen took careful notes while allowing the family to process their emotions. Her priority was ensuring Emma's immediate safety, while gathering the information needed to prevent further abuse and potentially pursue criminal charges against Richard. The child's ability to articulate her experience would be crucial for any legal proceedings. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, I need to explain what happens next," the detective said gently. "First, Emma will need to be examined by a medical professional who specializes in these cases. We'll also need to ensure that Richard doesn't have access to Emma while we investigate these allegations. This means you cannot return home until we've taken him into custody." David nodded grimly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "He's supposed to be watching our house while we're here. He has keys and knows our schedule. What do we need to do to keep Emma safe?" His protective instincts were now fully activated, focused entirely on his daughter's well-being rather than any family loyalty to his brother-in-law. Meanwhile, back at the courtyard, Marcus had maintained his vigil despite having officially abandoned his post. His supervisor had arrived to question the breach of protocol, but after learning about the situation, had commended rather than disciplined the sergeant for his actions. The other guards on duty had heard about Marcus's response to the child's plea for help, and there was unanimous agreement that he had done the right thing. Detective Chen contacted her colleagues in Manchester to coordinate Richard's arrest and the securing of the Harrison family home. Social services were also notified to ensure proper support for Emma's recovery process. The network of professionals trained to handle child abuse cases swung into action, each playing their role in protecting the young victim and gathering evidence. "Emma, I want you to know that the guard who saw your note cared enough about you to make sure you got help," Detective Chen told the little girl. "He broke some very important rules because he thought keeping you safe was more important than following those rules. There are many people who are going to help you and your family through this." The little girl wiped her tears and looked toward the window where she could see the palace courtyard in the distance. "Can I thank him, the soldier man who helped me? I want him to know that someone listened to me because of what he did." Her request touched everyone in the room, highlighting the profound impact of one person's decision to act with compassion over compliance. Detective Chen smiled warmly at Emma's request. "I think that can be arranged. Sergeant Thompson would probably very much like to know that you're going to be okay now." The detective made a note to facilitate this meeting, understanding the therapeutic value for both the child and the guard who had chosen to help her. As the afternoon wore on, the wheels of justice and child protection began turning. Richard was arrested at the Harrison home in Manchester, and a full investigation was launched. Emma began the long journey toward healing, supported by her parents' love and a network of professionals dedicated to helping child abuse survivors rebuild their lives. 3 weeks after Emma's desperate plea for help at Buckingham Palace, the Harrison family found themselves in a completely different world. They had remained in London while the investigation proceeded, staying in a safe house provided by victim services while Emma underwent medical examinations and began working with a child psychologist specialized in trauma recovery. The familiar routine of their Manchester life seemed like a distant memory as they navigated this new reality. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Emma's therapist, had been working with the 8-year-old to help her understand that speaking out had been brave, rather than wrong. The sessions took place in a cheerful room filled with toys and art supplies, designed to help children express their experiences through play and creativity rather than just words. Emma had initially been reluctant to trust another adult, but Dr. Walsh's patient approach was gradually helping her rebuild her sense of safety. Emma has been carrying an enormous burden for someone so young, Dr. Walsh explained to Sarah and David during one of their family sessions. Children often blame themselves for abuse, especially when the perpetrator is a family member they've been taught to trust and respect. She's going to need time to understand that none of this was her fault, and that her family's response now is what matters most. Sarah had struggled with overwhelming guilt since learning about her brother's crimes. She attended her own counseling sessions to process her feelings of failure as a mother and to learn how to best support Emma's recovery. The knowledge that the abuse had been happening in their own home while she remained unaware felt like a betrayal of her most fundamental duty as a parent. David had taken indefinite leave from his accounting firm to focus entirely on his family's needs during this crisis. His anger toward Richard remained intense, but he was learning to channel those feelings into positive action for Emma's sake. The legal proceedings would be lengthy and complex, but his priority was ensuring his daughter felt supported and believed throughout the entire process. Meanwhile, the news of what had happened at Buckingham Palace had spread through the royal protection detail and palace staff. Marcus had been called to meet with senior officials to discuss his actions, not for disciplinary reasons, but to understand how the situation had unfolded and what protocols might need adjustment to better protect vulnerable visitors in the future. Sergeant Thompson, your instincts and actions that day potentially saved a child from ongoing abuse, Commander Patricia Yates told him during their meeting. While breaking protocol is never taken lightly, in this instance, your human judgment superseded regulations in exactly the way we would hope any of our personnel would respond to a child in danger. Marcus felt relief that he wouldn't face punishment for abandoning his post. But more importantly, he felt validated that his decision to act had been the right one. The image of Emma's desperate eyes as she held up that note had haunted his thoughts for weeks. Knowing that she was now safe and beginning to heal made every potential consequence of his actions worthwhile. Detective Chen had built a strong case against Richard Harrison based on Emma's testimony, medical evidence, and digital forensics from his personal devices that revealed additional disturbing material. He had been denied bail and was being held in custody while awaiting trial. The investigation had also revealed that Emma was likely not his only victim, leading to additional charges being filed. Emma's recovery was showing positive signs, though. Dr. Walsh cautioned that healing from childhood trauma was a long-term process that would continue for years. The little girl was sleeping better, her appetite had returned, and she was beginning to engage in normal childhood activities again. Most importantly, she was learning to trust that the adults in her life would protect her and believe her when she spoke about her experiences. The Harrison family had made the difficult decision to relocate rather than return to their Manchester home, which held too many painful memories and associations with the abuse. David was exploring job opportunities in London, where Emma could continue working with Dr. Walsh and they could build new, safer memories as a family. One afternoon, Detective Chen arranged the meeting that Emma had requested weeks earlier. She wanted to thank Sergeant Marcus Thompson personally for listening to her silent plea for help that day at the palace. The meeting was arranged in a neutral location, the family therapy center where Emma felt most comfortable and secure. When Marcus arrived at the therapy center, still dressed in his off-duty civilian clothes, Emma initially seemed shy and nervous. The man who had appeared so large and imposing in his ceremonial uniform now looked more approachable, though she could still see the same kind eyes that had given her hope that terrible day when she felt so alone and desperate. "Hello, Emma," Marcus said gently, crouching down to her eye level just as Detective Chen had done weeks earlier. "I'm very glad to see you again, and I'm so proud of how brave you were that day at the palace. You showed incredible courage by asking for help, and I want you to know that I was honored to be the person you trusted with your message." Emma stepped forward and surprised everyone by hugging the sergeant tightly. "Thank you for seeing my note and not ignoring me like other grown-ups did when I tried to tell them something was wrong," she said, her voice still quiet but stronger than it had been during those first terrifying revelations weeks earlier. Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes as he returned the little girl's hug. Emma, sometimes the most important part of any job is remembering that rules exist to protect people, not to prevent us from helping them. You helped me remember what really matters, and I promise that if any other child ever needs help the way you did, I'll remember your courage and act just as quickly. Sarah and David watched this interaction with deep gratitude, seeing their daughter begin to trust again, and witnessing the profound impact that one person's decision to act with compassion had made on their family's life. They thanked Marcus repeatedly, explaining how his actions had not only saved Emma, but had potentially prevented other children from being victimized by Richard. Dr. Walsh observed the meeting with professional interest, noting how empowering it was for Emma to see the direct result of her brave decision to seek help. The child was beginning to understand that her voice mattered, and that there were adults who would listen and take action to protect her. This realization would be crucial for her long-term recovery and development. The meeting concluded with Marcus giving Emma his personal contact information, with her parents' permission, so she could reach out if she ever needed support or just wanted to update him on her progress. He also presented her with a small ceremonial pin from the Queen's Guard, explaining that it was given only to people who had shown exceptional bravery. As the Harrison family left the therapy center that afternoon, Emma held her new pin proudly and walked with more confidence than she had shown in months. The journey toward complete healing would continue for years to come, but she now understood that she was surrounded by people who would protect her and that her voice had the power to create positive change in her world. 2 years had passed since that life-changing morning at Buckingham Palace, and Emma Harrison was now 10 years old, thriving in her new London school and continuing her recovery journey with remarkable resilience. The family had successfully rebuilt their lives in a cozy flat in South London, where David had found work with a financial consulting firm that offered excellent flexibility for his continued involvement in Emma's therapy appointments and legal proceedings. The trial of Richard Harrison had concluded 6 months earlier, with his conviction on multiple charges of child sexual abuse. The judge had sentenced him to 12 years in prison, and Emma had never been required to testify in court, thanks to the strength of the evidence collected by Detective Chen and her team. The recorded interviews conducted by trained specialists, along with the digital evidence found on Richard's devices, had been sufficient to secure the conviction without subjecting Emma to the trauma of courtroom testimony. Dr. Walsh had gradually reduced Emma's therapy sessions from weekly to monthly, noting the remarkable progress the young girl had made in processing her trauma and developing healthy coping mechanisms. Emma had learned to express her feelings through art therapy, creating beautiful paintings that showed her journey from darkness to light. Her latest artwork depicted herself as a princess in a tower, being rescued not by a prince, but by a brave guard who had listened when she asked for help. Sarah had returned to her nursing career, though she had switched to pediatric nursing at Great Ormond Street Hospital, finding new purpose in helping other children who had experienced trauma. Her own therapy had helped her work through the guilt and self-blame, allowing her to focus on being the protective, supportive mother Emma needed for her continued healing. The transformation in Emma's personality was remarkable to observe. The withdrawn, frightened child who had desperately pressed a note against the palace railings had evolved into a confident, articulate young girl who spoke openly about her experiences when appropriate and had developed a passion for helping other children who might be suffering in silence. Marcus Thompson had been promoted to staff sergeant and had become something of a legend within the Queen's Guard for his compassionate response to Emma's plea. His story was now used in training programs to teach new recruits about the importance of human awareness and the responsibility that came with their position of trust in the community. He had also become an advocate for child protection, speaking at conferences about recognizing signs of abuse and the importance of taking action when children seek help. The palace had implemented new protocols based on the lessons learned from Emma's case. Guards now received additional training on recognizing distress signals from visitors, particularly children, and clear procedures had been established for handling situations where someone sought help during public events. A discreet communication system had been developed to alert appropriate authorities without causing public alarm or potentially endangering vulnerable individuals. Emma had maintained her correspondence with Marcus, sending him updates on her progress and artwork depicting their first meeting. Her most recent letter had included a drawing of herself, wearing the ceremonial pin he had given her, along with a note explaining that she planned to become either a police officer or a social worker when she grew up, so she could help other children the way he had helped her. The impact of Emma's courage had extended far beyond her own family. Detective Chen had used the case as a model for training other officers on child-sensitive investigation techniques. The successful prosecution had also led to the identification and rescue of 2 other children who had been victimized by Richard, demonstrating the far-reaching consequences of Emma's brave decision to seek help that day at the palace. Emma's school had invited her to speak to other students about personal safety and the importance of telling trusted adults when something feels wrong. Though she was initially nervous about sharing her story publicly, Dr. Walsh had helped her understand that her experiences could help protect other children, and Emma had embraced this opportunity to turn her trauma into a force for positive change. The annual royal birthday celebration was approaching, and Emma had expressed a desire to return to Buckingham Palace, not as a frightened child seeking help, but as a confident young survivor who wanted to see the place where her journey to safety had begun. Sarah and David had initially been hesitant, worried that the location might trigger difficult memories, but Dr. Walsh had supported the idea as a powerful symbolic closure to Emma's recovery process. Marcus had arranged to be on duty during their planned visit, and the palace had prepared a special behind-the-scenes tour for the Harrison family. Emma would have the opportunity to see areas of the palace normally closed to the public, and to meet with some of the security personnel who had played roles in her rescue that day 2 years earlier. The night before their planned palace visit, Emma sat in her bedroom writing in the journal that Dr. Walsh had encouraged her to keep. Her entry read, "Tomorrow I go back to where I was scared but found help. I'm not scared anymore because I know there are good people who listen when children need help. Uncle Richard can't hurt me or anyone else now. I want to thank the guardman again and show him that I'm okay now. Maybe other kids will read about what happened to me and know that it's okay to ask for help when someone hurts them." As Emma prepared for bed, she looked at the ceremonial pin displayed on her dresser next to a photo of herself with Marcus from their meeting at the therapy center. She had grown so much since that terrifying day, when she had summoned the courage to approach the palace railings with her desperate plea for help. The frightened little girl who had been carrying such a heavy secret had transformed into a confident, young advocate for child safety. Sarah tucked Emma into bed, marveling at her daughter's resilience and strength. "Are you excited about tomorrow, sweetheart?" she asked, smoothing Emma's hair away from her face. Emma nodded enthusiastically, no longer haunted by nightmares, but instead filled with anticipation for positive experiences and meaningful connections with the people who had helped save her life. The story that had begun with a child's desperate silence had evolved into a powerful testament to the importance of listening, acting with compassion over compliance, and never underestimating the impact that one person's decision to help can have on another's life. Emma's journey from victim to survivor to advocate demonstrated that even the darkest experiences could be transformed into sources of strength and purpose when surrounded by the right support and care. As the Harrison family prepared for their return to Buckingham Palace, they carried with them not the pain of Emma's original visit, but the gratitude and hope that had grown from one guard's decision to see a child's cry for help and respond with immediate, decisive action. The ripple effects of that single moment of human compassion continued to spread, touching lives and potentially preventing future tragedies through increased awareness and improved procedures for protecting vulnerable individuals who found the courage to seek help.